Welcome to the Preservation Season 4 Healing Guide. My name is Bowser the Healer. Down below there's a table of contents. If you're just here to know what's new this season, please check out down below. I do have a section just for that. Anyone who's returning, don't worry, I'll be going over all the changes, our set bonus, you know it. Now, if you're trying to play Preservation Evoker, you might go, well, why should I play Preservation Evoker? Well, let me give you some reasons. On the positive side, this spec has every healing profile available in World of Warcraft, from ramping heal over times to big bursty cleave and full party heals, and not to mention two of the best emergency cooldowns in the game to quickly heal up the party. Preservation really does have it all. It also has a good suite of external defensives, some of the best in the game, from a shield for you and a friend to giving someone monk stagger and a 50% DR. There's a lot going on here that will benefit the entire party. The damage profile is also quite fun as a healer. Nice and bursty up front, which helps you get to doing other tasks, and when you do get to do continuous damage, high single target priority damage is very beneficial, especially in Mythic Plus. And of course, the biggest benefit, you get to be a dragon. Who doesn't want to be a dragon? But on the downside, preservation is extremely difficult. It's not very difficult like front-ended, like say Discipline Priest or Restoration Druid, but it is hard in that as the content gets harder, you need to play sharper. But I would say that it has a sort of gentle learning curve to start, so don't write it off if you're worried about something difficult. I think this one's a bit easier to approach than other healers that are difficult, but the range issues and the resource management are definitely the hardest parts. Your shortest spell range is a 25 yard and your longest is a 30. And so while you can be obviously closer to anyone than 25 yards, having a 30 yard maximum outside of the move Temporal Anomaly is a little tough. Your 40 yard moves are like the raid wide stuff, like giving out a buff or your big rewind. And yeah, that's nice, but range issues can be a problem. It's up to the Evoker player to position well and make the most out of a bad situation of positioning. You do have tools to help reposition players, but it doesn't always fix the problem, and thus sometimes positioning can be a very hard part of the spec. But trust me, with some practice, you'll get it down. The resource management is hard. It's not your mana bar that I'm ever going to be worried about. It's cooldowns, because preservation only has access to one move at all times that can heal. Otherwise, the rest of their cooldowns have either charges to them or big long cooldown timers, so you sort of have to play your cards carefully. But I promise you, I'm going to make it all easy and simple to start. There's a lot of fun to be had here, and once you get used to it, you never really feel like you run out of cards or you run out of solutions. It always feels like you got just one or two more things ready to go exactly when you need them. Okay, let's talk about stats. Although I do want to note that the stats I have on the PTR here are very thrown together, and I wouldn't overthink this at all. But I highly recommend we talk about mastery first. This is the raid stat. In Mythic Plus, you don't need as much of it, but more of it isn't bad. Healing done to allies is increased by mastery percentage while their health percentage is lower than your own. If it's the same or lower, your mastery will trigger. Your mastery also triggers at full potency on yourself. So always good to heal yourself first. You'll get full mastery out of it, and then you'll be ready to heal other people. Now, as a healer, it's not hard to keep your health bar up in percentage compared to your teammates. Not often anyways, but because you always benefit from this, it isn't super hard to do that. Main stat is, of course, our most important stat, followed by, I would argue, crit and mastery, depending on what we're doing. Critical is extremely important for PvE. However, in PvP, I tend to run super high mastery, as that tends to get the job done for me. For raid, I also run this high mastery, but in Mythic Plus, you'll actually see the versatility quite a bit higher, as a good crit, good verse combo is going to lead to some nice base values for damage and healing, and then mastery is kind of the icing on the cake. Haste, on the other hand, is a bit of a bait stat. I would never run 31% haste. It barely lowers the cast time on our moves like Living Flame, with its already 1.5 second cast time. It's normally like a 1.7 for me on live. And yeah, you're just not getting away from this move being a long one. I like to have around 20 something haste, 20%, maybe on the lower end, sometimes as low as 18. It's not a big deal. Your hasted cooldowns are Verdant Embrace and Reversion. And yes, they come up a bit quicker, but it's not by a ton. So try not to overthink it. When it comes to like extra bonus stats, avoidance is still kind of best in slot, right? So enchant your gear with avoidance. If you get leech, you get speed. We don't say no, but there's nothing there that I have to report on. It's all kind of normal stat stuff. When it comes to runes and files, by the way, I always just run tepid files of versatility. For my weapon runes, I run whatever I'm needing, which is typically speaking buzzing runes for critical, but feel free to go hissing runes as well, as they're gonna get the job done. But like most runes, use it to adjust your stats. If you have an unbelievably low haste, getting your haste up a little bit more might not be a bad idea. So you figure out what you need a little bit more of, but just note you're not really going wrong with crit or mastery ever. So if you just want to rock crit or mastery, it wouldn't be a big deal. Okay, we're going to go over all of the moves for Evoker. I'm so sorry I'm in the PTR and it's a bit visually noisy here, so I will do my best to mitigate that. And we're going to start with the damage and then go to the healing, as the damage is very important for preservation, but is also pretty easy to understand. So we'll start there, and then we'll move into the much more complicated healing side of the tree. Living Flame is your basic spell. It does damage or healing, and it's actually rather chunky. Use Living Flame when you're not sure what else to press for damage, and feel free to use it as a heal. With the way I talent, it's a pretty chunky heal and can actually do a lot of work for you. So I highly recommend you keep it around and you know how to use it. Note that Living Flames can give you this buff you see, Essence Burst. It's a 20% chance and it'll make your next essence cost move completely essence free and mana free. It's nice to use Living Flames to essentially farm an Essence Burst. The other move that causes Essence Burst on our kit is Reversion, more on that one later. Note that every Living Flame you ever see is a real Living Flame. And what I mean by that is if you throw something like this and you set up a combo to send out a bunch of Living Flames, all of them rolled the dice to get an Essence Burst. So just note that that's a pretty important mechanic, and whenever you hear me talking about Echoed Living Flames or Leaping Flames, that's what I'm talking about, and they're all real. Azure Strike. Azure Strike's just a basic strike attack that hits 2 targets and slows the target. It's a godsend in PvP, pretty good in PvE when kiting, but otherwise you're just going to use this move while you reposition. Aug and Devastation can get an Essence Burst from this, but we can't, so just use it to move. And while there is a talent to make it hit 3 targets, it's never stronger than a Living Flame if you talent for Living Flames. So I don't recommend pressing Azure Strike unless it's quite literally to kite or to move. Disintegrate. Disintegrate costs 3 essence and channels a beam on the target, slowing them and regenerating mana with the way we talent. Now this move is incredibly good for not only getting your mana back, but it is more damage than Living Flames. Make sure you're using it in single target when you want to do more damage, but if you're trying to set up for some healing, you might not want to spend the essence, and that's totally fine. And do note that if you have an Essence Burst available to you, I really didn't get an Essence Burst from that game. Are you kidding me? You can actually chain this move back to back, and there are some helpful weak auras to help you chain a little bit smarter, but basically you can chain whenever you see a damage tick and you can kind of connect them back to back. It's kind of cool. Fire Breath. Fire Breath is our first empowered spell, so let's talk about it. Empowered spells are moves that you can charge up to 3 levels, and a talent will also make you charge up to a 4th level. Every empowered spell is different. Some of them will change their damage profile, some will change how many targets they hit, and on augmentation, one of the moves actually changes how big it is. So charging up moves is pretty important, but it's kind of on a per move basis. When it comes to Fire Breath, it changes the damage profile, as it's always going to do this tooltip 186,000 damage before scaling, but if you level 1 it, a small amount of damage goes out, and then a large amount of damage happens over a large amount of time. Or if you charge it up all the way, you'll get more damage up front and less over time. However, charging it up to full is a good idea more often than not. Although do know if you charge it up to level 3 or level 4, there is an incredibly real chance that you rip threat from your tank at the start of a pull. So wait a couple seconds before pressing it, or later when I tell you about Tip the Scales, use Tip the Scales Fire Breath to scare the crap out of your tank. Note this gives you a buff called Leaping Flames. For every level you charge, you get another Living Flame. It's a little hard to see with everything going on here, but this means you can whip a bunch of Living Flames out right after a Fire Breath. You can use this to heal or to do damage. And if there's not enough targets to do damage to, they'll actually go and seek healing targets instead, which is kind of nice. Use your Leaping Flames to farm for essence and to either heal or do damage. Both are completely viable and absolutely a-okay to use. The final move to talk about is Deep Breath. Deep Breath is a 2-minute that we can talent to be a stun, which is quite useful, and honestly, it is a very good stun, but you can also just use it as a 2-minute damage spell. You fly in the air and you blast all the mobs. It's super cool. I'm a very big fan of it. Most of the time I use it for crowd control, but yeah, keep it handy. Fancy little 2-minute. Tip the Scales. Tip the Scales is a fantastic little button that will instantly empower all of your empowered spells to maximum. This means it's a full charge Fire Breath, a full charge Spirit Bloom, or full charge Dream Breath. Note that you can use this before a dungeon, and you'll reset the cooldown of your Tip the Scales, but you'll still have an empowered spell, so you can actually get some back-to-back empowered spells at the start of a dungeon, which is kind of neat. Now, this is very useful as an emergency heal early on, so if you're new to Evoker, you're new to Preservation, use Tip the Scales with Spirit Bloom with Dream Breath to save yourself from a problem. If you're better at the spec, all three of these get used, and if you feel like terrorizing your tank a little bit, I highly recommend and Tip the Scales Living Flame for massive damage, and then hit your Disintegrates. And if you do this at the start of a pull, you might die. But you know what? If you have to play a prank on your tank, I understand. All right, let's talk about healing on Preservation, but we need to start with two of the most core abilities, Echo and Temporal Anomaly. When you hit a target with an Echo, you heal them a little bit and give them a copy of any healing spell you do at 105% potency. So if I heal this training dummy over here, you'll notice that it splits the Living Flame and we get two of them. All of those Living Flames are real, it rolls critical and mastery separately, so it's possible to heal large amounts of players pretty quickly with a single target spell with a little bit of prep work. And note that it's not too spooky. It lasts a whole 17 something seconds on a target, so you can throw an Echo on someone and think about what you're going to do with them later. You can even go and do damage and then come back and heal someone when it's the right time. This is the combo mechanic, if you will. We start up combos with Echoes and then we cash them out with various moves. If it's a Living Flame or a Reversion, there's a chance that we get an Essence Burst. Temporal Anomaly throws a bronze time magic ball through the party, giving absorb shields to everyone. However, the first 5 targets it passes through, it'll produce a half potency Echo at 45% of the normal amount. So this still allows you to do big Living Flame setups, but note you'll get less healing out of the copied ones. But this also allows for a couple of really neat tricks. For instance, any Echo, whether it's Temporal Anomaly or it's a single one, you can get a double heal over time. So right now I have 2 reversion effects on myself. And because reversion has a talent called Grace Period, increasing healing received by 15%, a double reversion means I'm, yes, receiving 30% bonus healing. So it's a pretty strong way to play the game. But you can also use this to say Temporal Anomaly and then give a large group of players a double Dream Breath. So this means that they're receiving 1 full Dream Breath healing and then 1 half potency Dream Breath healing, which is a significant amount of healing. Comboing might sound a little difficult, but honestly, it's very easy. Use standard Echoes to set up for big amounts of damage or to cover a small group of players that got damaged. Use Temporal Anomaly as a nice blanket starter heal for a pull, and you can kind of just wait and cash it out whenever it's useful. And note, if you ever have an Echo down, an Echo will not be replaced by another Echo unless it is a stronger potency. So if you say give yourself an Echo at 105% and throw out a Temporal Anomaly, you won't suddenly have a 45% Echo on you. You'll maintain it. So if there's a player in particular you want to make sure is getting more healing, you can use a normal Echo and that'll override whatever Echo was on them or not allow it to be overridden when you throw, say, a Temporal Anomaly. We'll be going over combos and how to use them later, but for now, let's move through the rest of the healing spells. We already talked about it, but Living Flame is a very chunky heal. Use this whenever you don't want to spend on cooldowns or whenever you want to farm Essence Burst, as your Leaping Flames and your Real Flames from Echoes all have a chance to give you this beautiful Essence Burst. And speaking of Essence Burst, let's talk about our last Essence move, Blossom. Emerald Blossom drops a Blossom at the target and then heals up to 5 targets around with the Wavy talent. 3 targets if you don't take the Blossom talent. Now the one you just saw was actually rather powerful, and that's because of a talent called Ouroboros. This one's a bit more normal. Ouroboros lets you charge up your next Blossom by casting Echoes. And this is a permanent buff, so if you want a nice little pocket big heal, you can send out Echoes, you'll charge up Ouroboros, and then the next time you need a Blossom, it might be quite powerful because of Ouroboros. So I really like this talent. There are builds called the Blossom builds that do scale and work off of Blossoms entirely. They're mostly used in raid, and note in the War Within they're going to be a bit stronger in dungeons as well, but they're a very fun way to play. So if that seems to be doing it for you, hey, Blossom's got a lot of game in them. Okay, Dream Breath is one of our core spells. You're going to see me talk about this one a lot, and it's one of the big 3. The big 3 being Temporal Anomaly, Dream Breath, and Spirit Bloom. Dream Breath is a heal that you can charge up just like Fire Breath. If you charge it all the way up, it does more upfront healing. If you tap fire it at level 1, it'll do more heal over time. We actually generally use it for its level 1. So tap fire it, get those double dream breaths out on temporal anomalies, or single dream breath on a bunch of people with reversion on them. However, the spell is rather flexible, and let's say you need to do more upfront healing, feel free to charge up your dream breath if you say don't have a spirit bloom on hand. And speaking of spirit bloom, this is a massive single target heal. It's a very chunky spell, and the more you charge it, the more targets it hits. At level 1, at level 2, so on and so forth. Now, this is a good time to talk about smart healing, but if there's a bunch of echoes out on the party and some people have it and some people don't, and you full charge a spirit bloom, the game will intelligently attempt to pick who needs healing the most, making sure that targets with echoes don't get double healing unless there's no other target for the job, respecting your choice that who you picked as an evoker player to heal, and it kind of does the math and figures it out. The game always leans towards more healing, so it won't know to double up somebody who desperately needs healing. It just always looks for the largest amount of healing that it can do. And this calculation is done, I think, very frequently. So in Raid, you can actually use smart healing to do some very dynamic healing while players are potentially popping cooldowns, making sure that you're not missing any big gaps. Spirit Bloom is very good for topping off players or getting through a heavy hitting mechanic, while Dream Breath is a bit better as your baseline heal to get people started through a pull while you take care of doing damage or topping off other players. Use them accordingly. Reversion is a simple heal over time effect that doesn't seem very potent at first, but with our tier set is very strong and has more than a few interactions. So first things first, grace period down here. Targets with grace period on them, which means they have a reversion on them, receive 15% more healing. And yes, if we echo reversion someone, they're receiving 30% bonus healing. We talked about that one earlier, so let's talk about Golden Hour. Golden Hour, reversion instantly heals the target for 15% of damage taken in the last 5 seconds. This means a quick little heal on someone with an echo reversion isn't a bad idea, but this is amazing for healing tanks, as tanks take a ton of damage, and it's entirely possible to full heal them or do a large chunk of their health bar with a reversion or echo reversion. So use this on your tank buddies especially. And if you ever want a good laugh, head over to the training area and reversion these training dummies to see the most ridiculous number you've ever seen. Verdant Embrace is a movement ability and a healing ability. It'll dash you to a target and heal them, giving them Lifebind and you Lifebind. Lifebind is a talent that shares heals between partners, or rather on either partner, to heal the other one for 40% of the amount. This is nerfed through Temporal Anomaly, but is still entirely worth it, and is very useful for setting up gigantic Emerald Communion heals. We'll be talking about this one in a minute, but I figured I'd show it off now as this is the important combo setup with that ability. But if you already had a bunch of heal over times on yourself, and then you do a big Verdant Embrace and give people Lifebind, you're going to be getting a lot of heals. But Verdant Embrace on its own is a very potent, very strong single target heal. And if you take the talent Call of Ysera, it's an important part about making your Dream Breath stronger, but more on that in a minute. Okay, now that we've gone through all of the basic healing moves, let's go to the more advanced ones, starting with Stasis. This is a 1:30-second cooldown that takes a little bit of explaining. It can sound really complicated, but I'll give you the basic version and the advanced version. When you pop Stasis, the move doesn't go on cooldown. We actually need to fill our Stasis up with 3 spells to incur a cooldown. From here, we can load it up with 3 spells, although my rule is to always try to get 2 of the big 3, being Spirit Bloom, Dream Breath, and Temporal Anomaly. The game will remember what level you charge Spirit Bloom and Dream Breath up to, so if you want to set up a big heal over time in here, you can level 1 a Dream Breath, but if you want to get as many people as possible, get a fully Spirit Bloom charge in there and make it work. Now, when you put these moves in, the moves still go on cooldown and the moves still heal, so you can use this to say, set up and heal through a mechanic, and then when we're done, the move's ready. Now the cooldown is started, so it'll be at a minute cooldown by the time the timer is up, and we had 30 whole seconds to let our stasis rip. This means that whenever we want, we can just press it and we'll automatically cast the moves, and if the timer runs out, it will also automatically cancel the moves and kick you out of any channel that you're in the middle of. Stasis might seem a little complicated, but here's an easy way to use it. At first, I want you using it all the time. Put it on cooldown and just learn to put spells in it. Your opening rotation of a Temporal Anomaly and then doing damage and then a Dream Breath and then maybe you heal someone will get you a pretty nice stasis. Then the next time you need to heal, instead of healing people, you could just press stasis, get the heal out, and save yourself on your cooldowns, because a lot of our moves cost cooldowns, and thus it's a good way to kind of hold yourself over. But let's say there's a big boss mechanic going out. You could say heal through it with a temporal anomaly and a big spirit bloom. Then maybe you're topping someone off, you finish your stasis, and the next time the mechanic comes around in 30 seconds, you pop stasis to heal through it. That's a much cooler way to use it, but all of the above is fine. Sometimes your stasis is filled with things like Cauterize to set up a pseudo mass bleed dispel, which can also be really cool. Stasis is very flexible, so start using it often and early. However, I will note now, if you cannot stand stasis, there's a lot of viability in running Dragonflight instead. Just note that Dragonflight isn't as good as stasis unless you're in a raid environment, because this is uncapped healing, which for raiding is a pretty big deal. In dungeons, it's a little underwhelming. All right, next up on the list is Emerald Communion. So we showed this move off earlier, but you heal for 20% of your health and 2% of your mana, basically every second for 4 seconds. Any overhealing is transferred to an injured ally within 40 yards. You can also cast it while stunned, disoriented, incapacitated, or silenced. Emerald Communion is a very strong move, and if you're panicking and need to quickly heal someone, an Emerald Communion is a great way to do it. There's a talent here that will make it stronger by increasing your maximum health by 20%, and there's also a talent that'll allow you to move while communing because you're otherwise planted. But please don't ever take this, because you can actually just cast Hover and then cast Emerald Communion. This can become a bit of a crutch, and it's good in PvP, but this talent is better every time, so learn to press Hover before pressing Communion to get the most value out of it. Now, Emerald Communion does heal a lot and spillover heals. However, the most important thing you can do is set it up with a Life Bind. Get players' Echoes, hit Verdant Embrace, and then pop your Emerald Communion, and you'll be sharing those heals with everyone and doing spillover healing at the same time. Emerald Communion is a very good panic button and a very strong setup heal. Early on, use it to keep yourself alive when the going gets rough, and as you get into later dungeons and harder difficulties of raid, use Emerald Communion on setups to do absolutely massive plays. I cannot recommend this move enough. Even when you're playing a build that's majority on the bronze side of things, you usually still go out of your way to pick up Emerald Communion. Rewind is a fantastic move on a 4-minute cooldown that rewinds 33% of damage taken in the last 5 seconds by all allies within 40 yards. It has a baseline 40,000 something healing, and the healing is increased by 100% when not in a raid. So in raid, it's a nice tool. Outside of raid, it's a really good way to save the party when the going gets rough, but make sure damage has actually gone out so your rewind is doing something. And when you rewind, it sort of rewinds in stages, and I can show you what that looks like on these dummies, but it sort of rewind, 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 rewind. It sort of splits the damage that they took in those last 5 seconds evenly, and then rewinds over 5 or 4 ticks of that average damage taken. Does that make sense? It's strong. Highly recommend you learn how to use this. I don't tend to run these talents, not anymore anyway. For raids, sometimes you want it on a 3-minute, so Temporal Artificer is the way to go. And Erasure is pretty strong in dungeons because while it is a somewhat weaker version of Rewind, it's also still really good. So this can maybe prove useful for saving your buddies, or if you're used to hard carrying groups, Erasure will do a lot of work for you. Onto the Dispels. Our standard dispel is Naturalize. It cleanses harmful effects such as magic and poison. Wahoo, enough said. Cauterizing Flame, on the other hand, is a 1-minute, but like a dispel, it won't go on cooldown if we don't actually dispel anything. It heals when it works, and it cures bleeds, poisons, curses, and diseases, which is really powerful. And if you're feeling incredibly goofy, there's a few mechanics in this game, such as the tree boss in Algathar Academy, or you can use this on experiments in Aberrus, where you can actually set up a mass bleed dispel and then have 1 manual bleed dispel left and 3 in a stasis. So you can say, get everyone. It's a pretty cool niche thing to do, but I figure I mention it here. It does have a use in Mythic Raid that is incredibly helpful, but on Algathar, you'll almost never see me doing this. I'll usually just heal the mechanic and do the mechanic properly, but I would rather you know it's something that you can do. When it comes to defensives, let's talk about it. You have 2. Rescue will pick someone up and put them back down. It doesn't break channels, and it's not a defensive by default, but Twin Guardians will give you a 30% shield of your health to you and your ally. It does scale off of each individual's health bar, and it only lasts 5 seconds, but great for pairing a mechanic. However, just note with Rescue, this move, I 90% of the time use it to move someone from a bad place into a better place. because we do have range problems as Evoker, and sometimes you just gotta move the player. So this is how you move the player. Our next external is Zephyr. This is a 2-minute that provides 20% avoidance and a little bit of move speed when cast. Now, it only works on you and your 4 nearest allies, which in dungeons should be all of you. 20% avoidance is great because any AoE will in fact have a much more reduced effect on you. What's an AoE? Well, it's swirlies, it's things on the ground that take up space like lava, damaging wind, that sort of thing. Tank frontals are sometimes avoidable. However, it's not a shadow bolt volley, which will single target multiple players. So you'll have to learn where avoidance goes, but there's some incredibly weird spots. Like there's an arrow rain move in Noku defensive, but that's a swirly. So yes, it's avoidable. So Zephyr works. It's wild. Learn where Zephyr goes. It's a very useful defensive and will absolutely save your party when you need it. Time dilation is the strongest external defensive in the entire game. At a 1-minute cooldown, you give someone a 50% DR. But for the next 9.6 seconds, they're a monk and they have stagger. This means that any damage taken that isn't of that 50% is then dealt over the 9.6 seconds. So that you will still need to heal through the damage, but it's over the course of essentially 10 seconds, which makes it very, very powerful. Use this on brewmasters, use this on anyone who's about to die, tanks, other healers, DPS, you name it. Time dilation is your best friend and one of the strongest components on our kit. Now, as for our defensives, we also have Obsidian Scales. It's a 1.5 minute per charge, 30% defensive, last 12 seconds. It's good. Nothing to complain about. It's solid. Renewing Blaze, on the other hand, will heal you back for 100% of the damage you take over 8 seconds. So if you're taking too much damage too quickly, you'll still die, but Renewing Blaze can just straight up negate some mechanics. So it's a very nice defensive. I tend to use this in conjunction with an Obsidian Scale, but you don't actually have to. You can separate them. In PvP, you tend to use both at the same time, but it is what it is. Very strong move. Keep it around. Now onto utility and other spells and crowd control, starting with our kick. Quell. It's a 25-yard range kick for 40-second cooldown. Kind of sucks in the cooldown department. Please don't leave home without your kick. Very useful. Oppressing Roar is a 2-minute that makes targets receive 50% extra duration on their next crowd control effect. So the 3-second stun on your deep breath becomes a 4.5-second stun. The 5-second silence of Sigil of Silence becomes a 7.5-second silence. You heard me right. Oppressing Roar is a very dumb move. Use it with your party, use it with your friends, and if you're not sure how to use it right before you hit deep breath and you'll just get a better deep breath. Nothing wrong with that. It doesn't affect knockups or knockbacks though, but Blizzard, I know you listen to my videos. I would do anything to Oppressing Roar and Tail Swipe someone and knock them up to the stratosphere. Speaking of, Tail Swipe and Wing Buffet, or Wing Buffet, but you're going to hear me say buffet every time. These are knockups and knockbacks respectively. You can choose with a talent to reduce their cooldown to 45 seconds, but you can only really pick one. Very useful moves. They'll either knock slightly away with Tail Swipe or very away with Wing Buffet. Landslide is a line that just roots targets that you hit. Super useful move. It can work around walls as long as part of the hitbox goes through the wall. There isn't a ton of uses for this in Mythic Plus, but you can save some friends with it every now and again. And because it's on our way to natural convergence, you're gonna grab it every time. Now you do have Sleepwalk, which is a targeted sleeping move, and it puts a target to sleep for 20 seconds and they walk towards you. You can use this for some really cheeky skips in some dungeons and move an enemy out of the way, because you do not get aggro by giving someone Sleepwalk. That being said, in PvP, it's a little bit of a shorter cooldown, and you're going to need it on incorporeal weeks, and it's right here, but it's important that I mention it to you. Also, in the form of utility, we have Blessing of Bronze. This gives you and everyone in your party 15% off of their major movement ability. So this makes your hover a 30-second cooldown. Note that you also have Time Spiral for raids. This is an amazing talent that gives everyone a charge of their movement ability, even if they don't have it. This is mostly a raid talent though, and not something that you'll take in Mythic Plus, but it's important I mention it as it's very neat and it's very useful. Now onto our two final pieces of utility, one of which is Fury of the Aspects. This is Bloodlust, 30% increased haste for 40 seconds? Yeah. This is a standard haste. It's time dilation, bloodlust, heroism, you name it. And it still induces the 10-minute cooldown of you've been lusted recently, being a 5-minute on its own. You get the power of rainbow dragons, and you can just blast, so have fun. Hover is our final utility. You can use hover to dash in a direction, in any direction you want, cardinal and inner cardinal, or use it in place. Hover will stack with itself, so if you double hover, that's totally fine. But while hovering, you can cast while moving. Casting while moving is pretty important. Just note that you can't use your empowered spells while hovering. But this is essential because while Prez has some range issues, being able to move and cast allows them to get a lot done while on the move or repositioning, having no downtime. But anytime you want to cast that empowered spell, you're going to need to plant your feet. Now, because we've covered every button, there is one more button I would like to cover, and that's just Soar. Now, currently, it's only to start dragon riding. You'll fly up into the air, which costs no vigor, and then you can dragon ride. So if you just want to get around on your own wings, this is an incredibly cool way to do that. However, I do want to point out that in the War Within, we will have access to turning this into the old school style flying. So while it's slower in every way and not always the most useful way to fly, for any of you who RP, who've always wanted to sit there flying as your dragon just a few feet above the ground, this will allow you to do it. But Soar is really neat, have it on your bars to get around, and if you're into like herbalism or anything like that, this actually gets you moving quite a bit faster, so it can speed up farming a bit. So if you have a gathering profession on your healer, this is a good way to just sort of get a little more benefit out of it. Okay, I'm not going to go through every single talent because we will be here forever, but I will tell you about some of the core talents that we might have not gone over, and some talents that are a bit of a bait. For instance, innate magic, essence regeneration isn't that big of a deal for us. You don't really need to take this. Here's where your reduced cooldown on CC is for Tail Swipe or Wing Buffet. Sleepwalk is over here. I always take Landslide into natural conversions because it makes channeling Disintegrate not a chore. Always grab your kick. Always grab your kick. Always grab your kick. Ancient Flame is a cool way whenever you Blossom or you Verdant Embrace. Your next Living Flame is faster. Beautiful for single target healing. I cannot recommend enough. PvP players run this, but it's not essential. You get more damage here with Instinctive Arcana, up to 4% and 3% leech here. These are really fun. I highly recommend you run them, but when you're in higher content and things are getting a little dicier, pull talent points from here first to play around with your tree, as a 8% less magic damage taken and 6% stamina increase is kinda giga. Unravel we didn't talk about. This is a shield breaker move, just meant for shields. Very fun, very cool. Not always used though, so you might find that you're not sure where this goes and you don't need to take it. PvP players, this is fun, but it's hard to get to. However, there are times in PvE that Unravel is a good spell to take. So just know it's there, and if your team's ever like, hey, we need more shield breaking, congratulations, you can help. Oppressing Roar is here, but underneath it is Overawe, making it an AoE mass disenrage. It only gets rid of one effect, excuse me, but it does reduce its own cooldown the more you hit. So good for raging weeks, good for essential dispels, not something you gotta leave the house with every day. That's good to know it's there. Time Spirals down here. If you want to make Renewing Blaze either work faster or you want it to be a lower cooldown, here you go. But we need to talk about something I didn't mention. Source of Magic and Potent Mana. This doesn't work on you. You grab this talent node just to get down the tree faster in PvP. We can't take this unless it's raid. Well, we can, but like you can't do anything with it. Essentially, casting an empowered spell gives your healer mana. The more you empower, the more mana you give. This is dope for raid. You can help out another healer. This is dope when somebody else can give it to you. You can't do anything with it for yourself, so don't stress these points unless you're in raid. Potent Mana below it just makes you do 3% more damage and healing. Always ask other evokers to give you Source of Magic so you can get your Potent Mana. This is such a nice boon to give to a healer, but again, we don't gotta worry about it if we're in Mythic Plus. Only worry about it if you're in raid. On the healer side of the tree, all of this is essential. We talked about a lot of these talents like Golden Hour, Temporal Anomalies right here, and Resonating Sphere. These are essential for your combos. It's best in slot. I really want to tell you can run those Dormu's teachings because it's really good, but you have to give up Resonating Sphere, which is fun, but not worth it in higher keys. If the devs are listening, which sometimes they are, I honestly think if we can bake in Resonating Sphere to Temporal Anomaly, and make this a different choice node or a more powerful Resonating Sphere, and then Nozdormu's teachings can become a bit more viable, I think that would do great for player expression. I'd love to see something like that. Flow State's really fun to play with after using an empowered spell. Like sort of the world is just faster, movement speed, cooldown, recharge rate, cast speed. You just speed up time. Very fun, very cool to play with. Not a lot of talent points to get here, but honestly, if you're doing easier content, feel free to go crazy with this. Time of Need is a version of you comes out from the future and heals someone when they drop below 20%. They essentially come out Verdant Embrace and then mash Living Flame. It can only happen once every 60 seconds. Good if you're pugging, good if you're essential in PvP, not used in raid. This is a bit of a niche pick for us Mythic Plus players, but it's good. I used this on Everbloom on Tyrannical all of last season just because it saved my buns so many times when players like mispositioned or missed a defensive. Like Time of Need just did work for me. The rewind talents are here. You can do the 3-minute or the 2 charges. Both are equally good. Font of Magic will increase your empowered levels to 4, so you can rip more threat off the tank with Fire Breath. You can do more upfront healing with Dream Breath or hit a 4th target with Spirit Bloom. All of this is good. You don't need this talent in Mythic Plus. You definitely want it in Raid, but it's good no matter what. So I would grab this if you want it, but don't feel like you have to play with it. Another important talent up here, Spirit Bloom's cooldown's reduced by 10 seconds. You can also increase your Essence recharge if you're into that. Emerald Communion's here. You're always going to go here on the talent tree. Try not to ever ignore this move. However, down here is Rush of Vitality to make your Emerald Communion hit harder. Don't take this talent. You can just hover. I'm telling you now. Call of Ysera. I don't necessarily always take this, and I'll explain why, but this is a very meta, a very good way to play Preservation. By casting Verdant Embrace, your next Living Flame or Dream Breath is powered up. 40% for Dream Breath, 100% for Living Flame. This is awesome. Super useful move. Love it. However, you need to cast Verdant Embrace, which as a pug player isn't always viable for me. Sometimes I need that move to move around or to heal someone who's taken extra damage. I don't necessarily want to tie it to my Call of Ysera all the time, but it's really good. If you prefer this playstyle, go for it. I prefer having 30% Dream Breath healing all the time to make my life a bit easier. So pick what's better for you and your playstyle and your group, but this is what I typically run and I love it. Now, there is also known to people as the Blossom build. The Blossom build is a really cool way to play where you drop Emerald Blossoms. I will not be going over it, but you go through Fluttering Seedlings to Field of Dreams, down through here, and grab Cycle of Life. When used in conjunction, it's a lot of rot healing and it's super good in raids. Love this build. Some people live and die by this build, but it's a little hard in dungeons, but thankfully in the War Within, it'll be a bit stronger in dungeons, so you're probably good to go on that front. Give it a try if it sounds interesting, but it's not something I'm going to cover today. So what is the basic rotation? Well, there's a lot of ways to play Prez, and when it comes to healing, you're going to have to find solutions a lot of the times, but there is a nice little flow you can establish that I think makes the spec a lot easier. So let's say we're walking up to the pole on these dummies. I like to press hover while I do this. Throw a temporal anomaly through your party, then walk up to the pole and full charge your Fire Breath. Then hit your Leaping Flame's Living Flame unless you need it to heal. Then use a Disintegrate to return all of the mana that you lost from that temporal anomaly. Then figure out what's happening. Hey, is my team taking damage? Oh, I'll hit them with a Dream Breath, so I start healing them. Hey, are they not taking any damage? Maybe cash it out with a reversion so you can start getting your set bonuses ready and maybe prepare for the next incoming damage with Grace Period. The world's your oyster. If you want to farm for Essence Burst with Living Flames, by all means. There's no real wrong answer here, but by throwing out temporal anomalies and then doing something else while you're waiting for something to happen isn't a bad idea. And let's say somebody takes massive damage. Maybe I echo Verdant Embrace them and I Verdant Embrace the whole party. That's okay. I needed to cash out and heal someone. So be flexible, but Reversion and Dream Breath are great go-to smother the party in heals. And if they take any damage, they'll already be healing by the time you get to them. And I find that to be very useful. Reversions, again, especially for a set bonus, are just so useful to bring. And a more advanced version of this pull starter is, let's say you have a feeling you're going to want to use your stasis. You can pop that hover, pop stasis, and then do the same setup. Note that stasis isn't going to go on cooldown at first because I haven't done more than one heal. And any healing that I get from Leaping Flames while done on an enemy won't pop my stasis or the healing from my Fire Breath. Then let's say somebody took damage, so I'm going to full charge a Spirit Bloom, hit all those targets, and then I'm going to go back to doing damage because there's nothing else going on. And then let's say someone gets hurt and I echo them. Now the stasis is ready. It's got 2 of the big 3 and it's got an echo in it. Then I continue doing damage. And then let's say the next round of damage is coming in. I throw the temporal anomaly, I Dream Breath, and then I know my stasis has 15 more seconds. Some more damage comes in, and then I use stasis to heal those players, get them back up to full, and then continue going back to doing damage. This little rotation will heal you through a lot of pulls, and it's easy enough for beginners. Temporal Anomaly, Reversion. Use stasis at the start if you want to, and just get comfortable with it. Honestly, I mean it. Start off simple, the combos will come in time, because comboing is a bit of a long process in learning when you can use things and why you should or shouldn't use things and learning the fights, but that's not necessary to get through a key at earlier levels. So if you're brand new, try not to overthink it. You'll start learning the combos. If you're doing harder content, get flexible using your other buttons to cash out combos so that you can start learning how you can mix and match the moves so that you're prepared for the harder hitting content where you might need to be careful about when and where you use the moves. Now, raiders, I don't have a ton of tips for you. I'm going to make a raid video at some point and I'll go over my favorite builds. But if you like the idea of playing with Temporal Anomaly in raid, Smart Healing is your friend. You always run Font of Magic, and let me give you the juice, the tips. Temporal Anomaly puts an echo on people that lives longer than the cooldown of Temporal Anomaly, meaning that you can Temporal Anomaly right before a mechanic, like 12-13 seconds. Temporal Anomaly basically as the mechanic happens, and then cash out with a spell. So if a Dream Breath can hit 5 targets, and you have 5 echoed targets in front of you and 5 non-echoed targets in front of you, if you cast Dream Breath with a single Temporal Anomaly, you'll hit 10 targets. Pretty powerful stuff, right? But if you have double Temporal Anomaly set up, that means that 10 people at least, if you haven't been popping other echoes, will have echoes on them. So after the first TA, do damage, farm for essence, or get your mana back, whatever works for you, drop some more echoes, throw a Temporal Anomaly, and then very quickly do your next heal. And you'll just get an additional 5+ targets in your rotation. But essentially by playing this smart healing build and reacting to damage, you're going to do a lot of healing. So learn the fights and react to stuff, and you'll learn where your moves go. This will work for normal and heroic just fine, but as you enter Mythic, note that you're going to be custom building per encounter. And I ran a very goofy Living Flame Mythic healing build, and it's been working great. So if you're really slick with it, I think you can get away with a lot of Mythic, but I'm not about to give you a Mythic build. I'll have all my builds that I use down below. It's just, there are a lot of viable ways to get the job done, and you're going to want to work with your team most of all. So focus on that more than anything, Raiders. Now, Preservation does have 2 big flaws, one of which is cooldowns, the other of which is range. So just to start with cooldowns, when we look at our moves, we have reversions, which are charges, a 30-second, a 30-second. This is normally like 13 to 15 seconds for me. Emerald Blossom revolves around our essence. And then we have Echo, which also revolves around essence. Verdant Embrace at 14 seconds. You get the idea. The only thing that we can rely on is Living Flame. So Living Flame is a great option to not only cash out combos and farm for Essence Burst if there's nothing going on, but it's also just a solid heal when you don't want to spend your other buttons. But note that it is possible to get scared on Evoker, not combo things and not utilize your moves correctly, and all of a sudden have no buttons left and you're dipping into your emergency cooldowns. As a beginner, this is totally fine, but as you get into those harder and harder dungeons, you're going to find that you need to learn how to use the combos or you won't make it. So make sure that you're comfortable playing the spec in the many different ways and you won't run into that issue. Practice makes perfect here, and I honestly mean it, the combos will come to you. Now, when it comes to the positioning side of things, there's 2 truths here. Someone's always going to make a mistake, and you're going to have to do your best to fix it by rescuing them, yelling at them in text chat, pinging them, and I'm not kidding. Sometimes you have to tell people, hey, stack in front of me. Sometimes you have to write, hey, stack in front of me or die. And then somebody will die, and they'll go, I'm not changing position for you, stupid Preservation Evoker, and leave the party. Oh, no, I'm not kidding. They're bad at the game. Most players will accommodate, and in higher levels of play, all it took was a simple rescue, and a player was like, oh my goodness, I know my mistake, and they position better the rest of the dungeon. Some players need multiple reminders. Very few people actually complain at high levels of play. So at low levels of play, they can get mad, and you're gonna have to move people sometimes. And that's unfortunate, but that is the reality. But it's also not all the time, and I get comments of people always complaining about range, and I'll be the first to tell you, most Evoker players mess up their positioning. You can fix most of the problems in Mythic Plus and in Raid by positioning a little bit better. And feel free to tell your Raid team to move in. Range does not need to be standing at 40 to 50 yards, trust me. But I want you to look at Dream Breath. I'm trying to avoid that very large Chaos Bolt. But see this cone? This cone is like the perfect Evoker spacing tool. So let's take a look at this. Here's the enemies. Here's my team. If I'm standing here, can my cone hit everything? Yeah, with a very small adjustment, I can hit everyone. If I'm standing behind my team, I'll obviously hit them and the mobs. But if that's too long of a distance, I might want to turn the other way. But I could also position next to the mobs. If there's no frontal, hey look, I can still hit my team. And then let's say there's somebody off in Turbo Narnia. You can always throw a temporal anomaly off towards them to get them, or get in range of just them and hit them with an echo, and then continue about your day doing everything else. That player will receive a full potency version of whatever you did, and honestly, they're probably fine out there in Narnia. If they do die, again, it might be that the mechanic got messed up, and it wasn't necessarily that you weren't giga healing them the whole time. So play it flexible and use that Dream Breath cone to help position yourself for success. It's important, it's a bit challenging, but trust me, with a little bit of time, it gets a lot easier to manage. For those of you returning this season, looking for the changes from last season to this season, or you're coming in from season 1 as a raider or somebody, I got you. What's changed about Preservation Evoker is that Living Flame is a lot better as a healing tool. So even without talents, it hits hard, and with talents, you'll get a large amount of healing, right? I have 1.1 million health, and I'm doing 176k with no echo, no criticals, right? And then furthermore, if I have, say, like a double reversion on me for 30% bonus healing, yeah, Living Flame is actually a pretty potent single target healing tool. So don't be scared of using it anymore. Reversions can no longer tick forever. They can extend themselves to a maximum of 12 seconds. That being said, that's on top of their already 14.4 something baseline time, so they can last quite a while. The new tier set doesn't make them have a higher crit chance, and in fact just makes them stronger by 50% after casting an empowered spell. This is still really good, and I feel like in Raid you'll be able to set up nice big reversion setups and get a lot of healing on targets, and then use your burst healing to patch up other people. Should be strong, but this isn't gonna be season 1. We're not broken anymore, but solid? Absolutely. We've been solid all expansion long. You'll just have to learn to change your playstyle up a little bit, but I'm not too worried about it. The second tier set is that your reversion healing has a chance to cause your next Living Flame to cast instantly and deal 50% increased damage or healing. This is kind of gross. In Mythic Plus, you're going to want to use reversion to cash out your temporal anomalies often, giving yourself these instant cast Living Flames, which will hit like a truck, scale off of things such as Scarlet Adaptation, will work with Leaping Flames, will work with Echoes. Trust me, you're going to get a lot of value out of Living Flame this season, and this is actually carrying over as a talent into the War Within. So get comfortable with this one. We're going to be using it quite a bit. I'm going to have all of my builds linked down below. I run a kind of crazy looking build for Mythic Plus for bugging, but it's worked marvelously for me. I will also be linking my raiding build, which might look a little funny to some of you, as well as a few traditional builds in case you just want to see what other people run. That being said, for raiders, I'm not going to link too much here, but please research the other builds that people run, as well as the Blossom build if that sounds interesting, because there's a lot of cool viability there. Preservation, at the end of the day, is a pretty tough spec that some people find incredibly hard, and I don't want you to be put off by that. I want you to know that there's a learning curve, but get in there, throw some temporal anomalies, and react to damage. And I think it'll all come together nicely, especially the positioning stuff. If you remember what I said about Dream Breath, using that cone to help you position, it makes a world of difference. But that's going to do it for me. If you have any questions, I stream on Twitch all the time at Bowser the Healer. And of course, just hit up the comment section. I'll try to update anything that's out of date. I'll try to be as attentive to comments as I can throughout the season. But I'm also getting to the point as a creator where I'm getting a little big. And it's a little hard to keep up with all the comments. So I will do my absolute best. Thank you all so much for watching. And I will see you in the next one. But it's a fun little damage move. Use it whenever you want to blast or when you want to stun targets. Oh God, and don't get stuck in a wall. Oh Lord, oh Jesus, oh God. Oh PTR, oh have mercy on me. How did I do this? Oh God, there's so many dogs.